All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of Into the Lion's Den with your co-hosts, Mr. JD Stevens. No nicknames today.
No
He's just waiting
nicknames?
for it. All right, Captain Top Knot and Christian Griffith, brought to you proudly by LVL Creative Studios and Pride Roofing and Construction. I'm not even gonna do it anymore. You guys let me down every time.
Why do I let you down?
You gotta say meow.
Meow. Is that what you want? Is that what you want me
That
to
is
do?
exactly what I want. This has made my whole life. All right, we are going to be moving into a new topic today. We're going to be talking about leadership, and this one is going to be leadership through trying times and
Building adaptable teams.
building adaptable teams. So this should be a really fun topic to go through. You get to hear a little bit about our experiences and the growth of the organization. So I know we spun off of that, but I'm going to give you some fresh examples from our time and what changes in the economy, changes in the way that insurance companies have worked over time, changes in the way people need to be managed. I think is probably a pretty important topic. With all of the soft-skinned folk that we have in today's day and age. And so,
Well, a different priority of the new generations coming into the workforce too. Of like,
that's a more professional way to say it, but I'll just call it soft-skinned.
I mean, I feel the same way about it. Don't get me wrong. Don't get it twisted, but it's definitely just the adapting to the new generations coming into the workforce and their expectations they're coming with.
Mm-hmm. So that's our topic. So JD, if you want to take us in, let's do
Absolutely. So we have a lot of unpredictability in the economy right now. Market fluctuations. We've even seen like technology changes and how quickly they can change and improve or like totally destroy their usefulness for our organization. So how do leaders stay resilient and keep their teams adaptable?
this. So how do leaders stay resilient, and how do you keep your teams adaptable? This is kind of a hard question to answer with short statements, but I've always been guilty of one thing, and I think that helps pretty tremendously with this particular topic. Is that I have an overwhelming sense of optimism, right? There's never been a point, I've obviously gone through my trials and errors in life, and I've hit some low points and those types of things, but regardless, in business, I've always stayed overwhelmingly optimistic. Like when trouble comes, whether that's problem with an individual account or just a very large scale problem, broken things within your mechanisms at work and that kind of stuff. I've always repeated the same things to myself, which is that, well, for one, nothing in life worth doing is ever going to be easy, right? And for two, I guess we talked about this on the wrestling wrestling podcast, but Dan Gable always said, once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. And I actually firmly believe that. And it's, everybody has their version of wrestling. They've gone through their trials, they've put their focus and dedication into something they really truly cared about. And that took a lot of training your mind to stop naysaying yourself and that type of stuff. So the overwhelming optimism, I think, is incredibly important in order to remain resilient, because and expecting, right? You need to always understand that no 2 days are going to be the same, and you're always going to have things pop up in front of you that you have to be adaptable to. So you might as well be light on your feet, right? If you're expecting something, you're light on your feet. You're not back on your heels. You're not getting blown over by a problem, right? So as far as remaining resilient, overwhelming optimism, staying ready, staying focused, and addressing challenges for what they are, which is learning lessons rather than just another nuisance or another stressful thing in your life. It's like, no, I want to tackle that, because once we do, we're going to be better. And I think that really plays into the second part, which is building adaptable teams. It makes total sense to me to address and always talk about and always be accountable to problems and errors that we create, but with that positive mindset of, hey, now that we've found that this is a problem, now we get to be better.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. And that resilience in leadership is probably one of the biggest things you have to teach your team. Mm-hmm. And so if we start with just taking what you said and starting with the basics of it, of how is resilient leadership different from like traditional leadership?
Hmm. I don't know. Where are you trying to get with?
So traditional leadership a lot of times is just the head down, bootstrap, push, like it's much more internally focused of like, or not internally, but externally focused of like, you're going to do this because I told you,
Mm-hmm.
rather than traditional leadership being around the ideas of flexibility, quick decision making.
Sorry, you meant adapt or resilient leadership.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got confused. I was
Yeah. Sorry.
like,
Resilient leadership.
mm-hmm.
More characteristically is around flexibility because traditional leadership is typically less flexible.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be the quick decision making. A lot of times you see in old companies of like it takes forever to make one choice
Mm-hmm.
and it's got to go through 16 different boards or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
16 different decision makers where it's like ultimately we decided this weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of times where it has to go through those things. And then resilient leadership a lot of times is more focused on growth rather than remaining where we are.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, the reason I was confused by it is, I mean, that is a character trait of a leader is resilience,
Absolutely.
right? You have to be resilient. You have to be able to shed the things that are coming at you, and not let them weigh you down as you're navigating these, you know, incredibly dark and sometimes treacherous waters. It just is what it is. When you're a leader, your job is to make decisions and to get your team or your group or battalion or whatever leadership group whatever you're leading, get those people to buy into that same direction, right? So if you're talking about one being in all forms of leadership, um, so you said there's a lot of flexibility with resilient leadership. I think it's important to probably make sure we give a clear differentiation when it comes to flexibility. We're not talking about exceptions,
No,
right?
absolutely not.
We're not talking about exceptions like, one person behaves one way and it's okay. That's a condoning incompetent behavior. We talked in complete, very, very lengthy videos about condoning incompetence and what that does to the rest of the team and the toxicity that it creates. So it's not about, just putting up with certain things, but it's more about being able to guide yourself through uncertainty. And so, yeah, flexibility meaning you don't know what's coming at you, but you're willing to take it head on because you're light on your feet and you understand that once you've achieved this, you've become better. I think that's the biggest differentiator there. But yeah, I want to make sure that we at least said that. And no leader should allow exceptions within their organization or whatever they're leading, right? If there's a standard, if there's a protocol, if there's an expectation, those expectations need to be met. And if they're not met, the leader is the person that needs to correct it. Right.
Absolutely. And I think that the big thing with flexibility is the ability to pivot. It's not that, you know, we're always going to, like you said, we're not going to condone incompetent behavior, but sometimes, I mean, I've gone through it of like with software changes of like, okay, this fixed this problem, but now there's a problem I didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And resilient leadership is taking that in stride and being like, great, I know I don't have this answer right now. I will have it soon.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to, that's where the flexibility comes in of like, this was unexpected. I had looked at everything and didn't realize that through X, Y, and B that, it could be even something that people who use the software day to day never communicated that they needed. But then once it was gone, they're like, oh, wow. I didn't realize how much I actually used that day to day. And that resilient leadership is being able to take that in stride and be like, great. So it's not in the same place, but does it exist in another way within the new software? And being able to train those things and like your leaders, any leaders that work alongside a team, and if you've been put in a position of leadership, you have to be able to think through those things.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they can't find it right now doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
and being flexible and finding those answers.
Yeah, I think if we're sticking to the script of the resilient leader, I think a resilient leader understands how to continually assess what the priorities are and attack their days with that understanding, right? Because priorities are going to change. I know a lot of times when things pop up, there's a lot of guys in our office that when there's a problem, it's instantaneously like it's treated like it's a fire. But not all problems are a fire.
No.
I think if as a leader, as a business owner, as somebody in charge of people or things, what's important to always keep in mind is this going to affect reputation, and is this going to affect finances? Those are the two most important things, right? It's not to say they're the most, your reputation and how much money you have. That sounds conceited. It sounds weird, but as a head of something, of some form of function, you have to keep those two things in mind, because one, financial, if it has a financial implication, it's going to affect what you're doing in business right now, right? It's going to limit your access to things, limit your ability to do certain things, limit just your overall reach, right? And if it affects your reputation, then it's going to continually affect your finances, your ability to move, ability to adapt and overcome, and that type of stuff. So a resilient leader, in the definition that you gave, that's thinking in growth, with a growth mindset, with flexibility, ability, the ability to mold and move with the currents that's coming at you. They have the ability to change their priorities day by day, or hour by hour, or minute by minute, depending on the scenario, right?
Absolutely. And a resilient leader also is capable of saying, I get that this is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a fire.
Mm-hmm.
A resilient leader doesn't respond, doesn't carry the same emotion to every problem that the other leader, like
Mm-hmm.
that the younger members of their team
Mm-hmm.
potentially are going to be carrying, of like, hey, we're good.
Yeah. Emotional intelligence plays a huge factor in your ability to be a leader.
Absolutely.
Simple and straightforward. If you're the person that's overreacting, your team is never going to feel comfortable enough to build like inside your team. They're not going to be there long enough because they feel like they're at risk at all times. The emotionally competent leader will take it in stride, not wear it on their face what they're thinking inside their head, and not allow themselves to speak until they've had a chance to formulate a smart plan, but they give exacting detail. So if you've been able to achieve this leadership role where people actually view you as a leader, when there's these things that they think is a fire, but you tell them is not a fire, and we're going to approach this at this time, they'll actually listen to that. They'll understand it when it's coming from you. But if you haven't, given your time and dedicated energy to create this respect within your leadership role, then they're just going to assume that it's never going to happen, right? But you have to do the follow-up. As a leader, you have to do the follow-up. It's like, I'm going to approach this first. I'm going to do what you just asked me to do second. But you can't forget about doing it second, right? You let people down once, they're going to assume you're always going to be let down, and you lose all of your traction. You don't have half of your platoon as you're marching into battle, right?
Absolutely. And then as part of that, of like, we have that resilience, but then you have to have your own internal resilience. And when you're dealing with fires or problems externally from your business, because there's always going to be things going on in your life, and sometimes those things are going to be harder than others. So what are some of the ways that
Before we ask another question, I think my mentor, one of my mentors, I've mentioned him on here a number of times. His name's Nolan. He said something that was really important for me. He said, when it's time to make a decision as a leader, you have to weigh what your consequences are of this decision, right? And he said, what is the worst thing that could happen from, I can't remember what the example he gave me was, but he said, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen, right? And I was like, well, I guess I could die, right? And he goes, okay, let me give you, and he's like, that's extreme, right? Because nobody really wants to die. We're always thinking about, survival, and we're always doing everything that we can to thrive and survive and whatever. And he said, but in a business scenario, it's never life or death, right? And he said, so what's the next biggest, like, what's the worst thing that could happen in a business situation? And I was like, I guess we could fail. He's like, yeah. And I was like, have you already been there before? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I started from nothing. I was fine then, and I brought it to here. And he goes, so if you're okay with that, if you're okay with the fact that you might have to start over, then you should be confident with every decision that you make from that point forward, right? If you already understand the worst thing that could happen is you just have to start over, okay. And if you're okay with that, move on, make a decision. But in leadership, you have to be able to make an effective decision. It's not always going to be perfect either, right? I think I brought this up earlier podcast too. I was like, I obviously wasn't in the military, so I've never been in this scenario, but it's a good visual, right? If there's a, call him a captain, and they're on a battlefield, and they've got a bunch of people that are following his orders, and you have to turn left or you have to turn right, right? Indecision is worse than just choosing one path, right? Because if everybody's following this corridor and everybody turns right, you might be going into ambush or you might be going into a protected area, right? Same on the left. It might be an ambush, it might be a protected area. That's 50-50 shot. But if you stand upright and you sit and you don't make a decision, everybody's dead, right? It's 100% of the time you're going to fail, right? So make the choice, right or left. If it's the wrong one, acknowledge that it was the wrong one and be flexible and adaptable enough to pivot and move into the right space.
Absolutely. And that, I think that is a important part of like mental toughness. Mental toughness plays a huge part into being a resilient leader. Mm-hmm. And the other part of that is with mental toughness, there's also self-discipline. Mm-hmm. Of you lead from the front. I feel like the most effective, in my opinion, most effective leaders lead from the front. Mm-hmm. So even if you're not doing the things that you're telling your team you need to do, they're going to follow your example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've had guys on the team, so we have some pretty strict protocols when it comes to how you turn in a job. So this is very industry specific. Our business is, our business specific. But, our guys, when they find a new account, they sign a new contract, and it's time to move this account from something that we're trying to earn to now it's time to build it. They have a very strict guideline on how they deliver. We call it a project handoff, right? How they deliver the instruction manual to the building team, right? And I've had people that, they were just trying to be helpful, but ask me, in the production division or estimating division, do you want me to just push this through without the paperwork? Do you want me to just push this through this way? Do you want me to just do it for you? And my answer is always no. Like, I'm always like, that would be great. You'd save me an extra hour. I could tackle some other things, or you'd save me 2 hours, blah, 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 right? But I don't want to, right? Because if I set the wrong example that I'm not following the same protocols that I put in place for my guys, then they're going to assume that it's not as important as I've made it out to be for them, right? And so I purposely will say no, because I think it's important. I show up on time every day, right? I don't take long breaks. I don't do the water cooler talk for too long. I'll walk around and stretch my legs here and there and ask people how they're doing. I'll do a little bit of management by wandering around, right? That is a methodology. Just wander around, ask people questions and stuff. I'll do that occasionally, but I'm not setting an example that I'm okay with myself taking time away from my dedicated, whatever I'm dedicated towards. Because I don't want to be seen. I don't want people to assume that that's going to be okay for them to do, right? Leaders need to understand that they're under a microscope, right? Everything that you do, every shortcut that you might take is going to be taken by somebody else. And if you don't want it to be happening, then don't do it. Lead by example.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I think that you've seen that, and that's going to, we've seen that. And when you take the shortcuts, how quickly they spiral, or like, even when, you have the team that's like, hey, we can help you do this, but you've always said no. That always comes from that Brazilian's leader mindset of, no, I put the protocols in place. Mm-hmm. I'm going to follow them too. I am not outside of that same guideline. Mm-hmm. And there's some people that are like, well, but you definitely could be. And it's like, you're right, I could be, but I'm not going to be.
Yeah, not only as like the vision leader or director or whatever, but as the owner of the company, I literally could do whatever I want to whenever I want to. But that's not going to set the right things in motion for the people who are, whether looking up to me or just reporting to me or whatever it is, it's not going to set the right things in motion. So I'm never going to do that. I could approve my own job. I could do this. I could do that. I could just pretend that none of my protocols exist because I know this job is going to take a little bit less effort than that job. It doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter whatsoever. I know that that seems like it could be an efficiency and we can move through something faster, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let the protocols that are in place run, set the right example. I'm going to let the people that I've put in place do their jobs, and we're just going to keep the what does he say on Remember Titans? He's like, I run 3 plays like Novocaine, always works, right? Following your own procedures the way that you've set them, it's like Novocaine, so it always works.
Absolutely. So, kind of staying in the same vein, but we have seen a lot of changes in the last, call it 2 or 3 years. Just in the logistics world and everything else, of like, there's been a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years with changes for things like inflation, or we saw very significant supply chain disruptions. And then even workplace shifts of like, I always laugh at the nobody wants to work anymore, because if you look at news articles for the last 100 years, every 10 years somebody says the same thing of like, nobody wants to work anymore. But there's changes to the workplace, and like, how do navigator, in your opinion, how do resilient leaders and the leaders we've put in place navigate those challenges?
I think proactivity is probably the smartest one word response I can give to you. You can anticipate your market. I mean, we couldn't anticipate what COVID was going to do, right? But what we did, and what I've done over time, is I've sought out guidance in certain scenarios. I've asked people who've been in these particular scenarios what they've done. I also rely on the team that I've brought in to allow their thoughts to be heard, so that it's not just a one tracked, one vision mindset, because there's times where I'm not looking in the blind spot when I'm trying to make a decision, right? But they are, because they're standing right here as opposed to where I'm standing. Their perspective is different, right? And so I think being proactive and seeking out guidance and counseling is really important. I think that utilizing the team members and believing in your team members, that's the other part. We talk about empowerment of our team. If you've done what you should do, which is find people who are better than you to do the jobs that you're hiring them for, you can ask them to give you some expert guidance. You can ask them what they would do in those scenarios, and chances are it's going to be a much more well thought out plan, because they are the expert in that area, right? So relying on your team and trusting your instincts with the team that you've recruited, it's a really powerful piece to being able to navigate. The economy. We purposely chose this business because it seemed to be a very recession-proof business, right? We saw that when COVID happened. It was, insurance companies were considered, what was the term that they used? Essential
Businesses,
right? Construction was also considered essential business, right? The preliminary or our dominant funding agent, the insurance, wasn't shutting down, right? So it followed our plan. So thinking a little bit further outside the box when you start your business is probably a good start to being able to be resilient in business, is knowing what's coming at you. But for us, we knew this was pretty damn close to recession proof, right? Insurance is always going to be funded. They're $1 trillion a year, not organization, but industry. Right? Construction is always necessary. Everything is always eroding, right? Not only that, but we're always replicating, right? We might have declining birth rates, which is something that, politicians are currently heavily talking about, which they haven't talked about in a very long time. I won't go on the political pulpit today, but
yeah.
anyways,
I hadn't heard that.
But anyways, birth rates are declining, but that doesn't mean that we've stopped reproducing. That doesn't mean we don't need more housing. We don't need more spaces for businesses. We don't need more X, Y, and Z. So construction's always going to be there, and insurance is always going to be there. So it seemed like a pretty smart place to play. But navigating that, it took time and dedication, right? When you run into a problem, on a battlefield, you have to make a quick decision, right or left. I just talked about that. in this type of industry, you need to make a quick decision, but that decision can be thought out, right? You can give it 4 hours, you can give it 4 days, depending on what it is. You can put the pieces in place, you can ask the questions, you can bring in the right minds for it, and you start your new protocol. Right, simple and straightforward. And make a sweeping change, you have to be effective with your communication, but you also have to do the research to make sure it's the right, as close to the right decision as you can. But yeah, everything's always changing. It was part of my very first answer, which is you have to be quick on your toes. You have to understand that today's industry is different than tomorrow's industry, which is different than next Monday's industry. There's always going to be something changing. And also you have to keep an eye on the markets. Like for us, we work with insurance companies about 60% of the time through our projects. So I have to be very in tune with the changes that insurance companies are making, whether that be the experiences from claims adjusters and what they're saying. I'm always picking them apart while I'm on site. I'm always asking them questions. Tell me a little bit about, some of your procedural changes. Tell me a little bit about this. On my last insurance claim with USAA, I saw that they changed the way that they paid for this. Can you give me an explanation why, right? Because I want to know how to prepare my team so that we're making the right judgment calls. And then we're also not guiding our clients in the wrong direction, right? That's a really good way to ruin your reputation, is encouraging clients to do the wrong thing, right? So there's always ways to find the information, but you have to be active. You have to be proactive when you do it.
And I think that proactivity keeps, one of the common mistakes that leaders make, which is fear-based. Fear.
We're doing the
Sound
same
like
thing. We're both bit guys today.
I can't remember who to. Porky Pig. Sound like Porky Pig today.
Yeah.
But a lot of leaders make fear-based decision making, or they neglect innovation, which ends up creating the problems that we've been talking about. Of like, sometimes you do have to okay, take a step back. We can have a couple of minutes to make this decision, and actually think through this whole process, and then it's relying on our success, relying on hey, we know that we can make these decisions right now, and we can move forward without making this decision in fear. I think that we had to do that with some product changes that we made when we hit a huge supply chain issue, and then we also had a company change one of their lines, so we had to flow with those changes and not make those changes in fear.
Well, I think that you would be doing yourself an absolute disservice if you were not willing to evolve with the times, right? Everything has changed. Just 10 years ago, the entire sales and marketing industry was completely different than it is right now, right? Ask somebody who's pitching marketing, right? Lachlan's shaking his head, right? They're selling you this idea of, becoming an incredibly marketable brand and that type of stuff, but they'll tell you themselves that they need to have a dedicated person all day, literally reading code in the background with Google's algorithms and the way that they do things. Otherwise, today you're going to be ranking great and tomorrow you're not, right? You have to evolve. You've got to get people. You have to be. What's the best way to say this? You need to. I think I said it already. You need to evolve with the times. So I've seen this also in play, right? So we've been up against a 40-year contractor, a 20-year contractor, and us at that point, like a 5-year contractor, right? But I saw the presentations of the other contractors, and 40-year contractor is still writing his bids on a piece of loose leaf paper with a pencil, right? That's not going to be taken very seriously in today's day and age, when you could pay $50 for a professional presentation software to plug that information into and put your graphics on there, and it looks great. It's the same thing. But it's going to be looked at two different ways, because your market is also evolving with the times as well. And they know that, this piece of paper looks a little bit like it's lacking, whereas this presentation looks great, right?
Well, your leaders are also getting younger, and your younger generations are more and more technology based, for good or bad. But you have to meet that also, of your decision makers aren't all, the previous generation, where a handshake and paperwork and, a written bid is sufficient any longer. Of like, I, from in my personal time of like, I've lost jobs this way of like, I was doing it that way at one time of like, yeah, this is what it costs for me to do, audio for the day. And they were like, great. Do you have a contract or do you have a, like, I was like, well, it's always just been an agreement. And they're like, yeah, no.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I grew up. You look a person in the eyes, you shake their hands, and your word is your bond. Like we just discussed, I made my promises, you made your agreements. There we go. It's not that way in today's day and age, right? And it's not, and it's not just that. It's like we talk about, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, we talk about if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist. Is a thing that we cover quite a bit of. That's a big thing of like, because of the rise in frivolous lawsuits, I'm going to go with. Everyone's a lot more wary too. It's no longer just the handshake thing, because you never know when somebody's going to try to, there's plenty of negative players out there that aren't.
Yeah. And it's not just your competitions that are negative players. I mean, there's clients that you should have
walked away from,
qualified better. And sometimes they don't show their cards until it's time to pay. You don't know until the very end, right? But the contract needs to be in place, right? It's written down, it exists, it's legal. That stuff's important. You need to evolve with that. You need to have good legal guidance through all of those types of things. We've struggled with that, not struggled with it over time, but we've hit roadblocks because we found out the verbiage was easy to manipulate. It was too vague, kind of stuff, stuff like that. So, but even and another thing with evolving with the times and technology specifically, there are literally programs where if you were to fill out, a pay-per-click ad on Google, within 30 seconds, you're going to get a estimate from some company that you filled this form out from, right? Because they have a software that the address automatically populated. It used satellite images to scan the roof, or to, because it was already built in, and it uses algorithms, creates this number. It's integrated with this estimating software, blah, 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 blah. Here you go. Here's your roof bid, 30 seconds, right? Now, I don't trust it because I've tried it. I've looked at different ones and I'm like, no, this is off. This is missing this information, blah, 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 blah. So I'm not going to evolve to that scale, but I need to evolve to that pace. How fast can I get it out? How can I be as competitive with my timing? Because it's a point and click society, right? You literally can press a button on your phone while you're scratching your ass on your couch, and within 2 hours have something land on your doorstep.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways to do it. Because of the rise of, it makes me laugh because you pay someone to do your grocery shopping. Of like, I'm just gonna, whatever companies it is, DoorDash or Instacart, whatever it is, of like, I don't feel like doing that. I'm just gonna have someone else do it.
I'll pay the extra $20. You do it for me,
which it's just like, really.
but I guess I'm just trying to drive that point home, which is that it's going to be negative for you as a leader, as an organizational head, as a business owner, what have you, if you're not willing to evolve with the times, right? Because people can do things fast. People can do things very stress-free, very thought-free. You have to get your organization evolved to the point where you can compete with that.
Absolutely. So then within this, same thing, within the same vein, we're resilient leaders need resilient teams. And, one of the big things is like, where do I start? How do I build an adaptable team? And an adaptable team culture? Where would, that's going to be a big question. Like, how do I put this into practice for finding a team? Like, I have resilient leaders. I have great leaders, or I have great team members that I've made leaders, but now they need a team under them.
Yeah. So I think one thing's been very useful for me specifically in order to recruit and onboard and get people to buy in on this adaptable team by repeating certain themes, like working with me and or with Pride Roofing and Construction. Your we're not ground level any longer, but we're definitely not 40 years into this where we have layers and layers and layers of corporate hierarchy where you have to scale ladders for 50 years in order to get into a position. No, you could be a foundational principal player on this with this organization in a very short amount of time. That's really helped us, is to promote that idea, which is, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to see your investment play into our playbook. I want to see all of this stuff. I want you to be part of this canvas that we're painting. That's really helped, because then the people that are buying into that, the people that have bought into that on our team, have a completely different mindset. Right? It's like, well, how can I make this business better? Because if I do, it's going to make my life better. Right? So traditionally, in large corporations, they're taking the job because it's making their life better. It's not of their interest, at least at that point in time, to make that business better. It's to make their life better. But we've flipped that script, and trying to figure out a way to keep that in place is probably going to be something that, not probably, it will be something that will be not make or break, but it's going to determine how fast we can evolve into those exponential growth areas down the road. Because obviously we're going to be at that point in 40 years. I don't have any intention of losing, right? So in 40 years, we're going to be a much larger business. How do I keep that mindset? Well, I've got to recruit with that understanding that I need my personnel, whether they're entry level or whether they're brought in with a huge resume, to understand that their thoughts are going to be heard, that they're valuable, that we care, and we're going to consider that. And if it's worth it, we're going to play it straight in, and you are a part of that playbook.
Absolutely. I think that, the big thing, I think one of the big things that has led to the culture that we have here, but as opposed to other cultures I've been part of, or even built myself, because I've totally destroyed cultures in companies by being a young, arrogant, well, let's just face it, giant dick. I was completely unapproachable and not worth working with, and that was a hard lesson that I think a lot of young leaders learn, go through, because it's like, oh wow, I really like working with all those people, and they hate my guts because I was a tyrant. And that's not resilient leadership, because you're just do it because I told you.
Yeah.
And so, open communication has been one of the biggest transitions for me, of like, I want to hear what you think. I want to hear how we could be doing better. Not all of it is useful.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about that a lot, and specifically the management meetings, which is responding with explanation and a why.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like the traditional leader, in the way that you phrased it, is much more of like, do it because I said so, and they move on. Right. In a resilient leader, it's do it because this is what the organization is working towards with this particular subset of
this is why
problems.
We do it that way.
Right. Because when you give a why factor, it makes it very easy to buy into. And also, if that why factor maybe, and that still opens that gate back up about being able to be heard, because it's like, that's why we want to do it. But I think that there's actually a more efficient and streamlined way to do it. Right. Now, I'm never going to be happy with somebody changing something without it being approved and thought out and strategically implemented. But I'm very much going to hear them out, which is, I think, open door policies are really valuable. Now, it might be kind of a pain in the butt for people to be coming in and out of your office while you're in tune with something, you're locked in. But at the same time, them knowing they can approach you as a leader is very valuable. You want to build a team around you that are bought into you, make yourself available.
And true open door policies, because there's a lot of companies, I've worked with leaders like this, of like, yeah, I have an open door policy, and they walk in there and it's an obvious that, like, why are you here? I don't have time to deal with this. And it's just like, well, I was doing what you told me to do an hour ago, which is like, if you have anything and you have questions, like, come in and talk to me. That's not an open door policy. If you don't want to talk to people and like you don't have that thing, don't put an open door policy in place and then be dismissive.
Yeah.
There are times when you can be like, hey, I really want to hear what you have to say. I'm in focus time right now. I can't meet with you right now, but I would love to meet with you when you have time next.
Well, that's just effective communication,
Correct.
right? You're giving an explanation. It's not just dismissive, like, nope, walk away. It's, no, actually, unfortunately, I can't answer this right now, but if you come back in 13 minutes, that's a weird number, but you come back in 10 minutes, whatever, I will have this done and I can focus on that completely.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because
that plays into it because you care.
Yeah.
Right. A resilient leader, somebody who's building an adaptable team, they need to, through their actions, through their mannerisms, through the way they communicate, they have to show their people that they care, that they exist, that they care that they're on the team, and that they care about what they're about to say. Very important.
Absolutely. I have more, but we are at our hard out.
Oh, shoot. Okay. All right. Well, so you want to just continue the topic next week? Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Into the Lion's Den. We appreciate your time, and we hope that you've gathered enough ammunition to go out, fight the good fight, and become a better person every single day. Please like and subscribe, engage in our content, ask us some questions. We'd love to tailor fit the next episode to you.